The moment I realized I didn't recognize myself wasn't dramatic. There was no breakdown. No crisis. No clear turning point. It happened quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when I caught my reflection somewhere I wasn't expecting it. For a second, I stared too long, not because I looked different, but because I felt nothing. No familiarity. No resistance. No connection. Just distance. That scared me. Because I knew who I was supposed to be. I could list my responsibilities, my routines, my role in other people's lives. I could explain my choices logically. I could justify how I got here. But none of that felt personal anymore. It felt rehearsed. I had become someone functional. Reliable. Predictable. I knew how to behave in every situation. I knew what was expected of me and how to deliver it efficiently. I rarely caused conflict. I rarely disappointed anyone. People trusted me. And I had no idea who I was beneath that trust. I didn't wake up one day and decide to lose myself. I didn't reject my values or betray some clear dream. What happened was slower, and far more dangerous. I adapted. Every time life asked me to adjust, I did. Every time something felt uncomfortable, I softened myself around it. I changed my tone. I lowered my expectations. I told myself I was being flexible, mature, realistic. Adaptation felt smart. Until it became permanent. I stopped noticing when I compromised. I stopped checking whether the version of me that showed up each day still felt true. I learned how to prioritize harmony over honesty, efficiency over meaning, acceptance over alignment. Nothing felt wrong. That's the trap. When losing yourself doesn't hurt, you don't fight it. I became someone who fit easily into my life, and slowly stopped belonging in it. I noticed it first in how I spoke. My words became careful. Neutral. Polished. I stopped saying things that revealed too much. I avoided intensity. I avoided anything that might force me to explain myself. I wasn't hiding. I was editing. And the more I edited, the less there was left to express. I noticed it in my decisions too. I didn't choose based on what felt right anymore. I chose based on what made sense, what was expected, what kept things stable. I stopped asking myself what I wanted and started asking what would cause the least friction. That question shaped everything. My days became efficient but empty. My life ran smoothly, but I felt strangely uninvolved. I was present everywhere, and absent inside. The most unsettling part was how invisible the change was. No one told me I was different. No one worried about me. From the outside, I looked like someone who had everything under control. Someone who had grown up. I told myself the same thing. This is what adulthood looks like. This is what responsibility feels like. This is what maturity costs. But somewhere deep inside, something resisted that story. I started noticing moments where my reactions felt delayed, like I was watching myself respond instead of responding. Moments where joy felt muted, sadness felt distant, and anger barely surfaced at all. I wasn't numb. I was disconnected. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had felt strongly about anything that didn't involve obligation. Passion felt abstract. Desire felt impractical. Dreams felt like something I used to have, not something I was allowed to want anymore. I told myself I had evolved. But evolution doesn't erase you. This did. I began to feel like my life was being lived by someone who knew the rules better than I knew myself. Someone who understood expectations but had lost touch with instinct. And the worst part? I had agreed to this version of myself. Every small adjustment. Every quiet compromise. Every time I chose fitting in over showing up. I had participated in my own disappearance. The moment in the mirror stayed with me. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't feel. That lack of recognition followed me through the rest of the day, pressing gently but relentlessly. I realized then that becoming someone you don't recognize doesn't require a mistake. It only requires time, and silence. And I had given both freely. Once I noticed that distance between who I was and who I had become, it didn't fade. It deepened. At first, I tried to treat it like a phase. Something temporary. I told myself everyone reaches a point where life feels dull, where identity blurs under responsibility. I assumed this was normal, the price of being stable, mature, reliable. But the feeling didn't pass. It followed me into conversations, into decisions, into moments that were supposed to matter. Birthdays. Milestones. Achievements. Even joy felt like something I was observing rather than experiencing. I was there. But not in it. I started noticing how automatic my reactions had become. How rarely I paused to ask myself what I actually felt before responding. My life had become a series of reflexes shaped by years of adaptation. Someone expected calm, I delivered calm. Someone needed agreement, I agreed. Someone needed reliability, I showed up. It was seamless. And completely empty. The internal breakdown didn't arrive as panic or tears. It arrived as a question that wouldn't leave me alone. When did I last make a decision that felt like mine? Not sensible. Not appropriate. Mine. I couldn't answer. That scared me more than any regret ever had. Because regret implies choice. It means you acted and learned. What I was facing was worse, a life built without clear authorship. A life that made sense on paper but felt foreign inside. I realized that the person I had become wasn't wrong. They were just incomplete. This version of me knew how to survive systems, expectations, and routines. They knew how to keep things working. They knew how to avoid disruption. What they didn't know anymore was desire. I had trained myself not to want too much. Wanting creates tension. Wanting leads to disappointment. Wanting asks for change. So I learned to lower my wants until they were barely noticeable. That strategy protected me from failure. It also erased my direction. I felt it most clearly when thinking about the future. Not fear, emptiness. The future didn't scare me because it didn't promise anything new. It looked like continuation. A smooth extension of who I already was. And I realized, with a cold certainty, that if nothing changed, would keep becoming more efficient and less alive. That was the breaking point. Not because something terrible happened, but because nothing would. I faced a brutal truth then. I had become someone I didn't recognize because that person was easier to maintain. They fit into the life I had built. They didn't ask for radical change or uncomfortable honesty. Becoming myself again would. That was the moral dilemma. Do you keep living as the person who works, even if they feel hollow? Or do you risk dismantling a life that functions to recover a self you're not even sure still exists? I was terrified that there was no way back. That this version of me was permanent. That the person I remembered being, curious, opinionated, emotionally alive, had simply expired through neglect. That fear kept me frozen for a long time. Because if I tried to return to myself and failed, would have proof that I was gone. Staying as I was allowed me to pretend. Pretend this was fine. Pretend I hadn't lost anything essential. Pretend this was growth, not erosion. But pretending requires constant effort. I noticed how exhausted I was all the time. Not physically, existentially. Holding a life together while being absent from it is exhausting. Performing identity without inhabiting it drains you in ways sleep can't fix. I began to feel resentment toward my own life. Not hatred, alienation. As if I were living inside someone else's choices and had no permission to rearrange the furniture. And the most painful realization came quietly, late one night. No one had forced me into this. I had chosen it, one small adjustment at a time. Every time I stayed quiet instead of honest. Every time I adapted instead of resisting. Every time I told myself, this is fine, instead of asking, is this true? I had let myself fade into a role that required less friction and less courage. And now that role was all anyone knew. Including me. That's when the fear shifted. I stopped being afraid of change. I became afraid of permanence. Afraid that if I didn't intervene now, this unfamiliar version of me would harden into something irreversible. That one day I would look back and realize I had lived an entire life without ever truly entering it. The question stopped being theoretical. It became urgent. Do I stay recognizable to others and invisible to myself? Or do I risk becoming unrecognizable to others just to finally recognize myself again? There was no safe answer. Only a choice between comfort and truth. And I knew, with painful clarity, that continuing as I was meant slowly disappearing behind a face everyone else trusted, while the person behind it vanished completely. Trying to return to myself didn't feel like going back. It felt like searching for something in a house that had been rearranged too many times. I didn't know where to look. I didn't know what parts of me were still real and what parts were just habits pretending to be identity. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living as someone who felt so efficient and so empty at the same time. The first thing I tried was honesty. Not dramatic honesty. Not confessions or ultimatums. Quiet honesty. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. Do I actually want this? If no one expected this of me, would I still choose it? Who am I trying to keep comfortable right now? Those questions were unsettling because they didn't come with immediate answers. They exposed how much of my life was built on reflex instead of intention. The next thing I tried was resistance. Not rebellion. Not destruction. Resistance meant not automatically agreeing. Not smoothing over discomfort. Not immediately adapting when something felt wrong. It meant sitting in that wrongness long enough to understand it. That was harder than I expected. Because adaptation had become my instinct. Discomfort triggered the urge to fix, adjust, minimize. Staying present without resolving things felt irresponsible. Almost dangerous. But something strange happened when I stopped adapting immediately. I started to feel again. Not just joy, frustration, irritation, longing, grief. Emotions I had kept at a safe distance returned unevenly, without order or permission. They didn't make sense at first. They didn't fit neatly into my life. But they felt real. That scared me and relieved me at the same time. Some parts of my life began to crack under that honesty. Conversations became awkward. Expectations shifted. People noticed I wasn't as easy anymore. That I hesitated. That I questioned things I used to accept without comment. A few people didn't like that. Some relationships grew tense. Others quietly faded. Not because I pushed anyone away, but because I stopped shaping myself to fit perfectly. That loss hurt more than I expected. Because it forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth: some connections only existed because I had made myself smaller. Letting those go felt like grief. But it also felt like integrity. I began to notice subtle changes in myself. How my body felt lighter after saying what I meant. How my thoughts felt clearer when my actions matched them. How even difficult days felt less draining when I was actually present in them. Life didn't suddenly become exciting or fulfilling. It became honest. And honesty has weight. There were moments when I doubted everything. When I wondered if I was romanticizing some lost version of myself that never really existed. When I feared I had already passed the point of return. Those doubts still visit me. But they no longer control me. Because I realized something essential: becoming someone you recognize again doesn't mean returning to who you were. It means choosing who you are now. I didn't recover an old identity. I built a new one, deliberately. One choice at a time. One boundary at a time. One uncomfortable truth at a time. I learned that identity isn't something you discover fully formed. It's something you maintain through attention. When you stop paying attention, it erodes. When you start again, it feels fragile at first. But fragile doesn't mean false. It means alive. I stopped asking myself if I had ruined things by waiting so long. That question only leads to paralysis. Instead, I ask something simpler: am I present in this moment? If the answer is yes, that's enough. I don't pretend I've fixed my life. I haven't. There are still compromises. Still routines. Still obligations. This isn't a fantasy of escape or reinvention. It's a commitment. To not disappear again. To notice when I'm adapting too much. To speak when silence would erase me. To question comfort when it costs me my voice. I understand now how easy it is to become someone you don't recognize. It doesn't require betrayal or failure. It only requires neglect. A long series of small decisions where you prioritize functioning over feeling, fitting in over showing up. I let that happen. And I take responsibility for it. But responsibility doesn't mean punishment. It means authorship. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels unfamiliar, if your life works but you don't quite recognize yourself inside it, understand this: you are not broken. You are not lost beyond repair. You are not too late. You are unattended. And attention can be given back. Becoming someone you recognize again isn't about tearing everything down. It's about stopping the quiet agreements that ask you to disappear. It's about noticing where you've been editing yourself out of your own life. I became someone I didn't recognize. Not because I failed. But because I stopped choosing. The moment I started choosing again, imperfectly, late, quietly, I began to feel real. And that feeling, fragile as it is, matters more to me now than being easy, predictable, or approved. I don't need to be who I was. I only need to not abandon who I am. That's how I finally started recognizing myself again.